Captain America Civil War was advertised to us as being about Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, Captain America versus Iron Man. The reality is so much better than that. This movie was really about Bucky and Steve. It shows us just how far Steve is willing to go for Bucky, how much he's willing to forsake. And for Bucky, it shows how much he trusts Steve, how much he cares about him. So let's call this movie what it really is. A love story. It's Steve and Bucky till the end of the line. Before I start in on the gayness that was the subtext of this movie, I know what you're thinking, non-Stucky shippers. You're thinking, well, what about that kiss between Steve and Sharon? And I have this to say to you. Many reviewers, including non-fandom reviewers, are calling the kiss forced and awkward, and I couldn't agree more. It had no place in the story, and it lacked the depth that Bucky and Steve's relationship has. Not to mention it's creepy that Sharon is Peggy's niece. But back to the love story. Time after time in Captain America Civil War, we see Steve and Bucky choose each other. Bucky chooses to trust Steve. Steve chooses to save Bucky. But I would argue they never even had a choice. Steve and Bucky are all each other has. Steve may have the Avengers, but they met him as Captain America. After Peggy's death, Bucky is the only one who knows Steve Rogers. Skinny, scrappy, punk Steve Rogers from Brooklyn. And Steve is the only one left who knows James Buchanan Barnes and not the Winter Soldier. In a very real way, Steve and Bucky are the missing pieces of each other's identity. They complete each other in a way that they did decades before, long before a war tore them apart and changed everything. Let me say this. This movie is not about fondness or even about loyalty. This movie is about love. And everyone knows it too. You're Bucky. You're Bucky. That doesn't sound particularly platonic to me. Natasha is arguably Steve's closest friend, and she says, I know how much Bucky means to you. Everyone can see how Steve feels about Bucky. It's not hard to guess. Steve knows he has to save Bucky, but he also knows he has to reassure a broken Bucky that he's worth saving. It was heart-wrenching to see Bucky seek that affirmation from Steve when they went to Siberia. Steve doesn't hesitate. Of course he doesn't. When Steve and Bucky team up on Tony at the end, they move in perfect harmony. It's the way they look at each other. It's the way they touch each other. It's all there. I have no doubt in my mind that if the Winter Soldier were a woman, we would have seen the exact same movie, just with a kiss at the end. Instead, this movie ends with Bucky being put back into cryosleep and heartbroken Steve Rogers. This movie is a love story, and love means never having to say you're sorry for how hard you ship two characters that it's practically canon. So what do you think? Leave your comments below, and I'll catch you next time with more feels.